Now, to commemorate Valentine's Day, I want you to think back to your first time. I remember my first time. It was kind of awkward and, well, to be honest, it was really uncomfortable and kind of, well, embarrassing from the start. You know, when I met her, I limped in like a linebacker who'd been laid out one time too many. My knees were aching and I had a lean to the left. And I stood in front of her and I was just taken aback by how absolutely beautiful her red hair and those big brown eyes were. But most of all, these two huge tattoos on her chest. And she had a chain that went from her ear to her nose that I thought was oddly attractive. And then she said it. Do you have a senior's card? A what? I'm 45 years old. What? Now, fortunately for me, my son was behind me in the line and he heard everything and he knew what I thought I heard. And he jumped in front of me and he said, Dad, Dad. She said, seen it. Do you have a seen it card? We're at the theater. Oh, Madam, Mr. Tabletop, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, honored guests. What were you thinking I was talking about? It's a true story. The first time somebody asked me for what I thought was a senior's card, but it was a seen it card, and it was the first in a long line of miscommunications. Do you care to guess why? It's because I was stubborn about getting hearing aids because I thought it would make me old. And here, in the end, it was not having hearing aids that actually made me old. And if you could only hear what I heard in past conversations, life is a lot funnier. Roger called me today and he asked me to teach you some things about public speaking. Now, Leslie, I yield to your tips on technology. The tips I'm going to give you tonight are meant for the stage, but here's the catch. We're speaking on Zoom these days, and a lot of what I'm going to teach you can be used right here because it's about communication. It's about communication using words, using rhetorical devices. The topic is, if you want to be memorable, scream at your audience. I'm going to clarify that because I'm going to get into actually screaming a little bit later. I want to caution you because I've taught this to many speakers and sometimes they get a little carried away. You guys know this guy, Roger Caesar? Have you met him? Have you seen his speech about skydiving? Some heads are nodding. I'm seeing black screens. Guests won't know this. But Roger he went skydiving. He gives a humorous speech about skydiving. And I saw it. I said, Roger, it's a good speech. Could be better. You're not screaming at your audience. You need to scream at your audience. So the next week I saw Roger give the speech again, and there he was, and he got up there, and it's the part where he's at the door of the plane, and he's panicked, and it's his turn to go out, and he does like this, and he jumps from the plane, and then all I hear into his microphone is, "Ah!" I said, Roger, what was that? I was screaming at my audience. You told me to scream. I screamed. They laughed. They didn't laugh. They covered their heads and ducked, Roger. But it was all funny. It was okay. Clearly, it's a good speech. I mean, he won the District 86 Humor Speech Championship with it. So congratulations, Mr. Caesar. But let me correct you tonight. Tips and techniques to build a better speech start with 3 things. And I sent this to Ryan, and I'll have him send it to you afterwards. But if you want to take notes, if you're a note taker, take it. First things first. Do not stand in front of a camera or take a stage unless you're willing to tell personal stories. Personal stories is what connects us with the audience. Personal stories is what gives the audience a peek into our lives. It creates an instant connection. The speech I had a few years before Roger came on the scene that won the District 86 Humor Speech Contest was about a time in the prison where an intruder came in and attacked me. It was an embarrassing, humiliating story, but I shared it. Why would I share it? Because immediately from the opening line, the audience came with me. My opening line was simple. Mr. Contest Chair, fellow Toastmasters, and anyone who has ever been a part of something so incredibly embarrassing, they wanted to conceal it from the world, the way an oyster conceals its pearl. Well, like an oyster that is pried open with a knife, I was being forced to cough up a gem. Just use your reactions down there and put your fingers up, a thumb up, if you want to hear what embarrassed me. I see some thumbs up. I can't see you all, but hopefully you do, because that's the point. When you open with something like that, you create an instant connection with your audience. The personal stories is what ties them to you. And I'm going to leave you hanging. I'm not going to give you the rest of that because that'll be another 15-minute story for me to get in. And besides that, I'm looking around this club. Roger, your club has changed a lot. Been a lot of turnover since the last time I was here. There's a lot of people that have seen that particular story. But there are things in there that already start to scream at you. But the basis of every good speech starts with a personal story. You can't tell somebody else's story, and a lot of speakers do. I do. Roger does. Actually, Roger shares my stories, and I share some of his stories because we're such good friends. But you can't do that until you learn how to properly tell your story. If you can learn how to tell your stories properly, then it becomes easier to tell somebody else's, because the whole thing here, Roger and I have a friend, Gregory C.N. Smith. Gregory always asks the audience a question when he teaches about public speaking. Who are you competing with? Who are we competing with when we're giving a speech? Anybody wants to throw out an answer, open your microphone and just shout it out at me. Who are you competing with when you're giving a speech? Between you and your audience, who are you competing with?
Yourself.
Anybody else?
Other speakers.
Sometimes. There's two things we're competing with these times. Gregory started with one, and I've added the other one for him. Gregory would tell you you're competing with Hollywood. We're competing with the movies. Entertaining people, and let's face it, public speaking is a form of entertainment. Motivational speaking, inspirational speaking is all a form of entertainment. You're competing with Hollywood. We just had a lovely table topic session on movies that most of us had never seen. And yet tonight, every one of us who speaks is competing with the memories of those movies. Those movies made people feel something. The best table topics tonight came from the people who understood the movie and they felt something about it. So it was easy for them to talk about it. You need to make your audience feel, and you make your audience feel by telling personal stories. But the biggest thing about telling personal stories, they're easier to remember. So many people try to memorize a speech. They write a story, and then they have to remember it. They have to memorize it. I don't have to memorize any of my speeches. In fact, if I showed you my notes tonight, there's probably 4 lines on there, and one was about Roger screaming. The rest of it is just the title of the story I'm going to tell you. I tell that story all the time. It really happened. It was an embarrassing moment where I misheard somebody. And yes, I built tension into it. I set the scene. And some people were thinking, because it's Valentine's Day, I was talking about something other than the first time somebody asked me if I was a senior. But you have to take the time to set the, I tell that differently every time I tell it. But it is a true story. And that's the secret. Personalization. If you have a message, sit down tonight and the message I want to share with the audience is, well, why do I think that way? Well, these are the stories in my life that made me develop that attitude about this topic. And you start with those personalized stories. So my second P, I have 3 Ps of presenting, and you'll get that in the handout. Personalization. The second one is preparation. And it's going to shock you. I have done this particular workshop a couple of hundred times. So when Roger called me today and said, can you bail me out? We've had a problem and somebody needs to give a workshop. I said, sure, I'll pull something up. I still practiced. I still found 20 minutes, 30 minutes to go over the stories just to reconnect my mind to the story. And so I did that. That's practicing. It's contest time. How many people on the call tonight are in a contest or have been in a contest? Okay, I've got a couple of hands up that I can see. So how often did you practice? Michael, I saw your hand go up, so I'm going to ask you, how often did you practice your speech before the contest?
Well, I practice a lot.
Give me an example.
Leading up to the contest, let's just say it was on a Wednesday, like tonight, like the Monday and Tuesday, I would be devoted, my evenings would be devoted to practicing the speech, maybe a couple hours. But even leading up to that, weeks prior, I would be going over it a few times a week as well, several times throughout an evening.
Good. Practice. You have to, even when they're personal stories and they're easy to remember, all that does is it removes the memorization portion. You get into the habit of telling it a certain way. You can play with the things, which are the scream that I'm going to tell you about in a minute. But you need to practice. Roger Caesar practices until he makes me sick. I have copies of Caring is Sharing. If people remember Caring is Sharing, he took it to the World Championships and I was working with him. I have on my laptop 23 versions of that speech where he practiced it and we rewrote it, and he practiced it and we rewrote it. He practiced it probably 200 to 300 times with me, and we rewrote it 23 times. And then he had Carolyn McKenzie rewrite it, and then Roger, Carolyn, and I got together for a session and probably made changes to it again. That's the way we do it. Now, to the young people on the call tonight, you are truly blessed. And I'm not talking about technology. That's Leslie's bailiwick. But technology has changed the world. You can walk down the street reciting your speech, verbally giving it while you're walking, and nobody will put you in the round rubber room that they did when I was a kid because you were walking down the street talking to yourself. Everybody thinks, oh, look, he's got headsets in, or he's talking on his Bluetooth to somebody. So you can get away with it. Nobody thinks you're crazy. Even as early as 2012, because cell phones and car, coming through the radio in the car hadn't come out yet. It was still new technology. And I found myself practicing for a speech contest, for the international speech contest, and I'm at the traffic lights. Now, I am a former hostage negotiator and corrections officer, and I live in a small town north of Guelph. And to say that I know all the police would be an understatement. And that came in handy this day as I am practicing my speech while I'm in my car, and I stop at a red light, and I'm waiting for traffic to clear and the red light to change, and I'm in my head, and I decide I've got to get it out. So I just start into my opening. And my opening in this was about a car wreck where I was with my roommate. And so I'm staring ahead, hands on the wheel, and I go, Ian, the car's on fire, the car's on fire, get out, get out. And then I hear, are you okay? And I look over, and there's a police officer with his window down, and my window was down, and he said, Neil, I don't see any fire, and there's nobody else in the car. And I looked, I said, I'm practicing a speech, Peter. Just practicing. He goes, oh, another goose chasing you around, Neil? I had to say, no. So you can get yourself into trouble. But nowadays, you guys have the Bluetooth. You can practice anywhere. Practice, practice, practice. You got to do, if you're going to a club contest, you've got to have done that speech at least 50 times to yourself. If you're going to an area contest or above, you got to have it done hundreds of times before you're ready to compete with the likes of Roger Caesar. That's how you do it. Personalized stories, practice, practice, practice. Rewriting constantly and practicing constantly. Now, the last P, before I get into the screams, is called presence. And this is a bit of a play on words. It's twofold. Presence with a C is about you being on stage and being in the moment and reacting to what audiences say and do. That interaction. But most of all, writing your stories and rewriting your stories and getting it down. That's a gift. That's a gift you're writing to the audience. That's a gift. Your message is the gift to the audience. And if you give them that gift, if you take the time to practice it and perfect it, they'll give you the gift of their presence. Their presence there. They will laugh when you least expect it. They will cry when you least expect it. You'll be able to take them on a roller coaster ride that competes with the likes of Hollywood movies because they're with you. A personal story practiced enough combined with stage presence, being in the moment and reacting when people react at a strange time for you. That is truly a magical moment on stage. I had it happen 2 times for me. And that speech I started to tell you about, there's a spot in there, the one that won the humorous speech contest, where I use a metaphor about the intruder squirting through somebody's hands like a greased pig in the county fair. And he went up in the air and he landed directly between my legs. And with the reflexes of a ninja, I wrapped my legs around the intruder and everybody laughed. Nobody in the 5 contests up to that moment, nobody had laughed at that moment when I said I wrapped my legs around the intruder. And the laughter was hilarious. I didn't know why, but I was present enough in the moment. Sideways to the audience, looking this way, wrap my legs around the intruder, and the laughter comes. And I went, what? I could be a ninja. And then a huge laugh again. And it was a spot where I never gotten a laugh before. But the reason they did, I found out later, was when I said I wrapped my legs with the reflexes of a ninja. I wrapped my legs around the intruder. My police boot actually caught the stage and I stumbled. I didn't even feel myself stumble, but I stumbled just a little bit and the audience thought it was hilarious. It was slapstick in the moment. It was a huge laugh. But if I had been in here, like some speakers are, thinking, okay, the next line after this is, then I carry on because I've only got 7 minutes. I have to finish. I have to give my next line. I would have missed that laugh. That's the power of presence. I really discovered the power of presence, not in a funny moment, but in a hugely tender moment. I was in the Niagara Falls and I was giving a speech to the St. John's Ambulance Society of Ontario. It was a paid gig. It was one of my first ones. And in Niagara Falls, New York, Niagara Falls, Ontario is where I had a car accident that changed my life. And so I told that story, and I told that story because they were ambulance attendants, and it would bring everything in. But what I wasn't expecting was the unexpected gift given to me by an audience member, not a paramedic, not an ambulance driver, but one of the biggest donors in the room, who I was told afterwards gave a huge donation to the St. John's ambulance because of the interaction that I'm going to describe to you now. It was back, the one I was practicing with the police officer, where Ian, the car's on fire, get out, get out. And I talked about being rear-ended, but the car being on fire, and I was paralyzed. My arms and legs wouldn't move, and I couldn't get out of the car. And then I stepped forward to the audience and I asked a simple question. Who would you think about at the moment you face your death? Do you feel that silence? Everybody right now is thinking about, well, who would I? And there was a woman in the audience in that silence who began to weep. It was a cry that was so real, so emotional. Oh, and she was right in front of me. And because I was present in the moment to feel it, to hear it, I got down on my knee and I took her hand as I gave the next line. And I looked her right in the eye, forgot about the rest of the room. And I said, I would think about my mom. And then I went into the humorous part of the speech. But that tender moment let her know that I knew that line meant something to her, that she thought about somebody, and it made a connection that was so powerful that woman opened up her wallet and gave a huge donation to that organization. But she talked with me for hours afterwards about the loss of somebody in her life and how she thinks about them every day. And she hopes that when he died, he was thinking about her. That's the power of personal stories and being present in the moment to make those connections. So I've talked to you enough. Now I'm going to scream at you. So what is Scream? You've heard some of it tonight already. But for me, Scream comes from Dr. Randy Harvey, who's one of the Toastmasters world champions of public speaking. And Randy taught me that the human mind is capable of understanding and listening to 650 words a minute. But the human mind, and even a fast-talking, smooth-talking speaker like Roger Caesar, is only capable of spitting out clearly about 135 to 140. Because if they're doing any faster than that, it gets to be so fast that you don't really understand. And then all the words blur together. And then you're trying to think, what is he saying? What is going on? And you lose them. So we have to speak slower and speak clearly. But the audience member can hear much, much more. So what happens in that gap between what we can give and what they can receive? It's lost time. And when it's lost time, the human mind will wander. That's where that old statistic comes, that 10 minutes after you've started speaking, half of your audience is thinking about sex. The other half is thinking about dinner. And nobody is thinking about you. That's why you have to be entertaining. That's why you have to scream at your audience and light up their brain. By using screams, you will create holograms in your speech that people can actually see, little mental pictures. You can talk at 150 words per minute, but a picture is worth 1,000 words. And that's how we fill the gap. So here's your secret sauce. What does Scream mean? The S in Scream is for simile. A simile is a way of saying something is like something else. Okay, and I used that in my opening, like a linebacker who had been leveled too much. So now you get a picture of a guy leaning, and if you know anything about football, a guy gets hit. And so you've got a picture of what I look like walking up just by using a simile of leaning like a linebacker. The C in Scream stands for contrast. And contrast is where you strikingly compare something to something else. Okay, that's like saying, let me get this right. His heart was as black as coal. Okay, you get the contrast of the coal and the red heart, right? You get the black and sometimes this is black, this is white. Those contrasts are what give you a visual picture. Rhyming words that have the same sounds. This is the gift of the spoken word. Did you see that beautiful young lady that spoke at Joe Biden's inauguration? I could listen to that young lady every day, all day. Why? Because her words are rhythmic and they rhyme, and away we go. We follow it. And you almost start to dance in your chair when she's speaking, right? That's the benefit of rhyming, and try to use rhyme whenever you can. And the echo is the idea of repetition, using the same word. I'll give you an idea. So here's the best line. If you want to understand how Scream works, I'm going to start a sentence. I want to see how many people in the room can finish it. And if you can finish it, put your hand up or hit the reaction so I can see an animated hand in your screen. I'm going to start it. Ask not what your country can do for you. Anybody finish
What
it?
you can do for your country.
What you can do for your country.
Right. That line from John F. Kennedy was written in 1962. But I can go anywhere in the world and I can repeat that line and just start it the way I did today, and somebody will finish it. Because there are 13 screams in that sentence. 13 screams in that sentence. You have to sit down and go through it, but once you do, you'll see them. 13 screams. That's the power of screaming at your audience. And the echo there is the do and the do. You know, the four and the four. That's the echo in there. The A in scream stands for alliteration. Now, alliteration is using words that start with similar sounds or the same letter. What did I use in the opening? Oh, beautiful, big brown eyes and two big tattoos. Big. Peter Piper picked up peck. All of those are alliterations, okay? If you can do that, Roger and I, when we try to put a speech together, there's always kind of like, we try to stick with threes, the rule of three. So if you get three S's or three INGs or something like that, that's alliteration. Because all of this screaming lights up the brain and keeps people engaged and stops them from thinking about sex. My goal here is to stop people from thinking about sex. And the M, of course, is for metaphor. And the metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or a phrase is applied to an object or an action which is literally inappropriate. You know, like he slid through my arms like a pig, greased pig at the county fair. Well, a greased pig in a prison wouldn't have fit. So the pig became a metaphor for something else. The most famous metaphor I know of is an old Italian song, "When the moon hits the sky like a big pizza pie." The pizza is the moon and the pizza become a metaphor for each other, and it's a metaphor of love because everybody, particularly Italians, love pizza. But that's the metaphor in that. So if you can put all of those and start using those in your writing, that's what makes your speech come to life, and that's what makes the pictures, the holograms, sit in your audience's eyes. Because if you can do that, you will keep them with you along the way. When I usually teach this, I usually talk about staging when it goes on there. Now, here we are on Zoom, so staging is really hard. In fact, a lot of us speakers that stage our speeches are struggling somewhat with the contest being that you can only be so far back. So we're playing around, and I can't go over here and create a hologram on stage left and then go over here and create a hologram on stage right. When you're speaking live in front of an audience, and please, we will get back there at some point, okay? Someday we will get back to being on a stage. When you do this right, when you scream properly, when you stage it properly, and Roger will tell this, you can stand here in the center stage and you can point over here and people will know what you're talking about because they'll see the hologram you created over there with your words, with your metaphors and your similes. And you can point over here and they'll remember what went on there. And then you can bring your message right back here to center stage and drive it home. Those are the reasons that we personalize our stories, that we practice them, and we stay present so we can create pictures and scream at our audience to be memorable. So the next time you're trying to figure out why aren't people listening to me, remember me and not Roger Caesar. Don't just create metaphors, similes, contrast, rhyme, echo, alliteration, and metaphors, and create holograms for your audience. Now, I know my time is up, but I would be more than happy to take questions from the audience. Mr. Toastmaster.
The floor is open for any questions.
Neil, first and foremost, thank you very much for stepping in at a short notice. I appreciate that you came here and taught our club members a little bit of your experiences. Here's what I would like you to touch on. We talked about Scream. In one of your speeches, and especially I love obviously the humorous one, but even the it was 2018 when we competed, and we were talking about the young boy.
Mm-hmm.
Tell people how it is that you connect with an audience, and even if we're even talking about with regards to being on Zoom, but how do you completely connect with an audience in those moments when you have to be sad, but you also don't want to take it overboard?
True. So what Roger's getting at is there's a technique to speaking. I've been an actor, so I have been asked to act. So when I talk about this particular aspect of it, in acting, you go all in. Okay, you go over the edge. When they tell you, now the speech that Roger's talking about, we were searching for a boy who had drowned, and it was a tragic situation for a community, and Roger's well aware that between division and district, I found the boy. And that, so telling it for the first time after finding him was gut-wrenching for me. But I used the metaphors to overcome the emotion. See, but by creating a metaphor of the group of searchers becoming like family, rushing in and throwing what we thought was a lifeline, a security line to the car, turned out to be a lifeline to a family. And we gave them their boy back so they could have closure. And we all rest together. And I can say that now, but I had to use those metaphors at that time in order not to cross the line. See, in acting, the director wants you. The director wants Neil, tell that story. If this was a play, the audience isn't here. They're watching on a TV set. So let your emotions well up and cry. Completely lose it and break down like you would. Because then what do they do in most movies and most plays? There's a phrase out there called send in the clowns. That's what they do. They send in the clowns to take the audience to somewhere else. Let everybody cry and then take them away. But in public speaking, we don't break that fourth wall. The audience is there. And there are no clowns to come on stage and save us. So the key here is to take them to the edge. It's okay to cry. It's not okay to lose your emotions. In that speech, there were tears for me, but I didn't break down. And then I stepped back and called to action the audience. When the call comes to you, do you hear them. And the ending of that speech was me miming a phone ringing and holding my fingers like this and saying to the audience, it's for you. Take the call. Because I used metaphors, I had control of my emotion to give a strong call to action. That's the beauty of screaming, because you can control your emotions with it.